Chapter 2. Kara shook her head when she heard Traylin's loud groan, followed by the click of the door. It must be pretty bad. Again. Her lips quirked as she pulled the door open. Leaning against it, she grinned at Trisha, Keelan, and Balin. Keelan's eyes narrowed, and he looked cautiously over her head into the living room. "Hi, Kara. Where is Traylin?" Keelan asked, in a hesitant voice.
"He's in my workroom with the girls," Kara replied with a huge grin. "I see Balin's hair has almost grown out again."
Trisha chuckled.
"Yes, I think he learned his lesson," she said.
Her eyes widened when she heard a long, loud stream of curses from the other room.
"It sounds like Traylin needs help, Keelan."
"Doesn't he always?" Keelan muttered under his breath as he held Balin out to Trisha. "It might be safer if he stays with you."
"Oh, he can't hurt anything,"
Kara exclaimed, tickling Balin's belly and causing him to laugh. "It isn't Balin that I'm worried about," Keelan retorted as he strode across the living room.
"I see he still hasn't forgiven the girls for your hair,"
Kara laughed as she held her hands out for Balin. She swung the small toddler around in a circle, laughing with him when he squealed. A familiar longing tugged at her. Amber and Jade were 3 years old now and getting into everything. Kara and her dragon were ready for a little boy to join the girls. "Traylin, on your left!" "No, your other left!" Keelan yelled in exasperation before his voice became muffled. Trisha chuckled and shook her head.
"What did the girls do this time?"
she asked, following Kara into the living room and half listening to the sounds of loud curses, childish giggles and squeals, and several crashes that could be heard from her workroom.
"Traylin built a robot for the girls. They took it apart, but not before they found my new cloner,"
Kara replied with a happy sigh. She sank down on the floor and released Balin, who was intent on the spilled basket of toys Traylin had been trying to pick up.
"Trisha, did you ever think you could be so happy?"
Trisha shook her head and turned to watch her son play with the assorted toys now scattered around him.
"No, I didn't. Keelan and I are talking about having another baby," she suddenly said, glancing at Kara with a wry grin. "Now that Balin is older, we were thinking it would be nice to have another."
Kara nodded.
"Every time I think about mentioning having another child to Traylin, the girls get into something."
She winced when she heard a low howl and glanced back over her shoulder at the workroom.
"Or he's passed out from chasing them," she added with a wry grin. "Carmen and Creon have offered to babysit the girls for the weekend. I might have to take them up on it."
Trisha laughed.
"Well, Keelan and I would be happy to watch them as well," she offered.
Kara choked back a laugh when Balin swung around and stared daggers at Trisha as if daring her to keep her promise to watch the girls again. She couldn't really blame him. A month ago, the girls had decided Balin needed a haircut, so they had found Traylin's shaver. Poor Balin had ended up with a partial mohawk. That wouldn't have been so bad, but they had also found her purple hair dye. In the end, Balin had needed to have the rest of his hair shaved, and all 3 of the kids had been a delightful shade of purple for the next several weeks until the dye finally washed off. Another burst of smothered curses pulled her attention to the door, and she sighed. Maybe tonight wouldn't be a good time to bring up having more kids. Maybe she would wait until after the fall festival at the end of the week.
"How is the new ride coming along?" Trisha asked.
"I'm almost done," Kara responded in a distracted voice to Trisha's question before she blinked and turned her attention back to Balin, who was driving a small truck up her leg.
"You are going to love it, little man," she laughed,
wrapping her arms around him and twisting to blow on his belly.
"You really should talk Traylin into having more. You at least have as much energy as the kids,"
Trisha laughed, sitting back against the cushions of the couch. "Morian and Paul say that Morah is crawling and getting into everything. I swear Daddy will have to tie the guys up if they don't quit telling him how to keep her safe."
"I know. I have to keep reminding Traylin that Morian raised him and his brothers and they all survived just fine. He isn't even overly protective of the twins so much anymore. Of course, I think he's given up and just focuses on damage control, Kara retorted. I told Dad that was what he and Morah got for having a little girl when she already has 5 grown, overprotective older brothers, Trisha replied dryly. I have to keep reminding Keelan that Dad raised me just fine. Of course, all he does is growl about that being different because he wasn't there to protect me. Kara laughed as she lay back on the floor and rested her head on her arm. She glanced at Trisha and shook her head. She felt sorry for Paul and Morah. Ever since Morah was born, the guys had been like a pack of circling dragons, hovering to the point that Paul had finally threatened to take them all out in the woods and kick their butts if they didn't leave their mother and him alone so they could raise their sister. Kara turned her head and sat up when she heard the door to her office open. She rolled to her feet and watched as Amber and Jade bounded out, both still in their dragon forms. Simba was right behind them, and the 2 smaller symbiotes were attached to him. One was attacking his massive golden paws as he tried to walk, while the other clung to his tail. Both were in the shape of tiny werecats. I told you to look up, Traylon said, with a slightly defensive tone. I couldn't, Keelan snapped, and ran his hand through his hair. I was too busy trying to grab the damn robot crawling up my leg. Son of a... His voice faded on a loud hiss when he jerked his hand out of his disheveled hair. Kara watched as a small flash of silver flew through the air when he shook his finger. Reaching out, she snagged it in midair and closed her fingers around the object. Daddy says a bad word, Balin whispered with wide eyes. Keelan, Trisha started to reproach before she shook her head. You look like you've just been in a battle and lost. I feel like those things are still crawling all over me, Keelan retorted with a shudder before he turned and pointed a finger at his brother. Stuffed animals, Traylon. You promised the rest of us only stuffed animals until the girls were grown. Traylon chuckled, even as his face contorted with a flash of pain. He reached up under his shirt and pulled out one of the silver robots, along with a few chest hairs. Holding it up, he studied the small electronic toy. It really was remarkable. They were complaining that they didn't move and were stuffing their symbiotes in them, Traylon explained as he reached up to touch the tiny robot. Come on, Keelan, you've got to admit these are pretty impressive. I can think of 6 different ways they can be used to help protect our world. The only ones that our world needs protecting from are Amber and Jade, Traylon, Keelan replied dryly. How in dragon's balls did they create these things? Kara watched as Keelan scratched his butt cheek before he reached into the back of his pants and pulled out another robot. Dropping it to the floor, he stepped on it before it could escape under the couch. We's used Mommy's new cloner, Amber said, shifting and toddling over to sit down next to Balin. If you turns the knobs, it makes things smaller. We puts the parts together just like Uncle Dulcie showed us. Uncle Dulcie? Traylon growled, raising an eyebrow at Kara. What? You know I love hanging out with the guys at the repair shop? You aren't still jealous after all this time, Kara exclaimed in exasperation. Traylon's expression turned dark. You were checking out his... He pursed his lips together, and he glanced at the kids who were staring up at him in fascination. Kara's expression softened, and she stepped closer to her mate. Lifting her free hand, she ran it along his jaw. His lips finally straightened out, and he gave her a sheepish grin. They are just as smart as you are, he muttered in a rueful voice. And as inventive as their father, she teased back. Well, now that we know that both of you are to blame for endangering our world, are you ready to go? Paul and Dola are waiting for us. Mandra was telling me that Paul has already been teaching Morah which plants she can eat and which to stay away from. We are all going to have a talk with him about that, Keelan grumbled. Keelan? Trisha laughed and shook her head before she reached down and quickly picked Balin up before Jade could tackle him. He started teaching Balin when he was even younger than that. Yeah, but Balin is a boy, both men started to say before Trisha raised her eyebrow at them. Okay, who's ready to go see Morah? Kara asked in a cheerful tone, knowing if she didn't, Trisha would show both men what a woman could do. I's ready, Jade excitedly exclaimed with a nod of bouncing brown curls. Can Zamber and I go as our dragons? Yes, we just need to wait for Daddy to get his boots on, Kara replied, looking at Traylin's bare feet with a grin. How about we take the girls and meet you there? Trisha asked. That sounds wonderful, Kara said with a grin. It will give me a chance to put this little guy up so I can study him later, she added, lifting the clenched fist with the tiny robot in it before opening her fingers and quickly turning it off before it could escape. Take Simba, Traylin warned with a wave of his hand at the golden symbiote lying passed out on the floor. At the moment, he was tempted to join the golden werecat. Simba, horsey! Both girls cried out in delight, hurrying over to where the symbiote rolled to his feet and shifted into a small pony, complete with a triple saddle. Dad is going to love this, Trisha laughed, lifting up Balent and placing him behind the girls. Hold on. You two behave, Kara said sternly, before giving both girls a kiss on the cheek and whispering into Simba's ear. Make sure they don't fall off this time. Let's go see your cousins, Trisha laughed, shaking her head and looking at Kara with a mischievous grin. See you in a few minutes. Kara closed the door and turned to look at Traylin. He was holding up one of his boots, a look of resignation on his face. Her gaze moved down to his boot. There was a line of teeth marks all along the upper rim. They'll grow out of it, Kara laughed, walking toward him and wrapping her arms around his waist. At least they have learned to control their fire when they sneeze. Traylin wrapped his arms around Kara and released a deep sigh. Kara rested her cheek against his chest, enjoying his warmth and the sound of his heartbeat. Her fingers played with the front of his shirt. She was about to mention how nice it would be to have another child when she saw a slight movement under his shirt and heard his loud hiss. Oh, I think you have another robot, Kara breathed, trying to slap her hand over it as it moved. Hold on. I can't. The damn thing is pinching me, Traylin yelped, wiggling. It's moving down. I know it's moving down, Kara giggled, slapping her hands along the path. It's fast. Oh, goddess, no, Traylin swore, grabbing the fastening to his pants when the tiny robot disappeared below his waistband. Don't, that hurt, he groaned when Kara accidentally slapped the front of him. Oh, sorry, she choked out, fighting back a sympathetic laugh. Just help me get my pants off, Traylin muttered in a hoarse tone. Kara quickly jerked Traylin's pants down while he frantically tried to catch the tiny robot crawling over his flesh. He snagged it, pulling the wiggling metal object away from him and tossing it across the room. It hit the wall with a soft ping and dropped to the floor. Well, that wasn't too bad, Kara replied with a pleased grin, staring up at him. Traylin glanced around the living room before looking down his body. His shirt was hanging down, his pants were around his ankles, his boots were lying on the floor, partially eaten. The living room was, once again, a cluttered mess of toys and varying shades of little girl clothing, and he couldn't be more content with his life. Returning his attention to Kara, Traylin's expression softened when he saw her searching gaze. He lifted his hand and cupped her soft cheek. No, it wasn't so bad, he agreed, bending to brush a kiss across her lips. How long do you think we've got before the others send out a search party for us? Kara's seductive chuckle mixed with his. Long enough, she replied, wrapping her arms around his neck. What do you have in mind? More babies, he remarked with a wiggle of his eyebrows. Oh. Yes, her dragon whispered with glee.